Good morning to all again. So now we can start with the first talk. That is a keynote lecture from Professor Lino Nobili, that is head of the Child Neuropsychiatry Unit at IRCS Gaslini here in Genova, and also is a full professor at the Dinogmi Department of University of Genova. And I think his two main research topics and clinical are epilepsy and sleep, and also the union of the two, sleeps in epilepsy. And today we'll talk about from dolphins to sleepwalkers, sleep as a global and a local phenomenon. So thanks, Lino, the stage is yours.
So, good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for this invitation, Annalisa, Alberto, Gian Vittorio. It's a pleasure. Yes, the title is a little bit funny. Yeah. We will be focused on dolphins and some birds. Indeed, this is a title just to tell you, and this will be the topic of my presentation, that we know now in the last 20 years we have done a lot of work on that, and sleep is a global phenomenon, but it's probably also locally regulated, and this opened really new windows for interpreting not only sleep, but many other state of mind, many other cognitive aspects of our life. So, first of all, in general, we define sleep in terms of behavior. So it's easy to say someone is sleeping or not, although sometimes you can be wrong, because you can close your eyes and then you are not sleeping, but you are thinking about something. So in general, this is the observation more frequently used to define sleep in terms of behavior, what the subject is doing. But indeed, we know that sleep is considered, as I told you at the beginning, a global phenomenon. Global phenomenon means that there are some regulatory centers that probably impose sleep on the brain. So there are specialized sleep network. Particularly, you see, this neuroscientist, Giuseppe Morussi, was one of the most important neuroscientists in the world, because he discovered the reticular activating system, that is a system that keeps us awake during the day. And when this system falls down, then there is the onset of sleepiness and then sleep. Now we know that this is a very complex phenomenon. There are many circuits, many regulatory centers at the level of the thalamus, at the level of the hypothalamus, the so-called flip-flop model. Now we discover also orexin, a substance that is able to keep us awake. So there are many circuits that are involved in this mechanism. However, we know also, and these are two guys in particular, Kruger, since the late 80s was the first one, and someone was saying this is crazy. They was saying that, okay, sleep is not only a global phenomenon. I would say the opposite, would say Kruger. Sleep is indeed a fundamental property of local neural networks or local neurons. And so local networks are orchestrated by a global system, but indeed they can have sleep alone. And so behavioral global sleep emerges when the sleep-like state at the local network level involve a large and widespread number of cortical regions. So the sleep onset is local. He was saying that it is, and was also one of the first creating a condition of sleep in a dish. So neurons making some cocktails around, modifying the environment, and so the neurons were starting sleeping. It was also saying that probably we start with sleeping, then we activate neurons, but in general, if we don't touch so much neurons, they start sleeping in the condition that we will see kind of bistable state. So we can describe sleep in different ways, looking at the neuronal activity, neurotransmitter, brain networks, excitation, inhibition, all what we want to analyze and with different methods and technologies, we can study using the criteria of scoring wake and sleep, non-REM and REM sleep. So looking at EEG, and today we will talk mostly about that, what we can see with EEG with respect to sleep. Or we can look at behavior, so analyzing reaction times, the subjective experience. Also, this is important. You are with the eyes closed, but if I tell you, were you thinking to something, and you can, yes, I was dreaming. I was not thinking at all. I was not there. Probably you were in deep sleep. So let's look at sleep in terms of the EEG. And I'm a child neuropsychiatrist, but a clinical neurophysiologist, and my first specialization was in clinical neurophysiology. And indeed, I started loving sleep because it was incredible. I was working with my mentor at that time, Professor Franco Ferrillo, and we were looking together the sleep EEG, especially during the recording, so staying there at the night, we were staying in the lab together. And every night there was this fantastic modification of our brain. So this is the activity of your brain, of our brain, when we are awake. So the brain is characterized by fast reads with some theta activity, but very, what we say, is a state of low voltage, random fast activities that are produced during wakefulness. Then we close the eyes, we are a little bit drowsy, and so we start seeing alpha activity, 8, 12 hertz, mostly in the occipital region, then moving towards the frontal region. So there is also traveling of the alpha waves from the posterior part of our brain to the anterior one. And then there is the appearance of these elements, so spindle in the frequency of 12, 16 hertz. It is the hallmark of the onset of sleep. This is a thalamocortical mechanism, mostly originated from the thalamus, projected to the cortex, and then there is a kind of thalamocortical oscillation. And the more we go towards deep sleep, we start producing more and more slow wave. This is called delta sleep. And this is reflected by the so-called hypnogram from wake, stage 1, stage 2, 3, and 4. Now, 3 and 4 are merged together in stage F3. So this take, depending on the age, of 30 minutes, 60 minutes. So the length of the cycle can be different depending on the age of the subject. And we have discovered, applying, and you are probably know very well, I don't have to explain you, if we apply spectral analysis to this activity, we can compute the power of delta and making this graph. So analyzing the dynamics of delta activity during the night. So these are the hours, so minutes per minutes. Here you have the representation of delta power, and you see that you have this decay of delta power during the night, like a sinusoidal, with a sinusoidal shape. So a peak here at the beginning of the cycle, then a reduction with REM sleep, and so. And so we know now that this delta activity is regulated by an homeostatic process. So it's strongly related to the amount of wakefulness during the day. So the more we stay awake, the more we produce delta activity during sleep. So we do not recover in terms of sleep deprivation when we are sleep deprived in terms of duration of sleep. We can sleep a little bit more, but we mostly recover in terms of how many and how amplitude are these delta waves. So we increase a lot the density of delta waves. So there is an homeostatic process increasing during the day, and then the decay of this homeostatic process throughout the reduction of delta activity. And this has a lot to do with synaptic processes and so on. And then we enter into REM sleep. And when we enter into REM sleep, EEG is showing us that our activity is very similar to the one that we have during wakefulness. In this moment, we have ocular movement, muscle atonia, and this is the the part of our sleep where it's very very high. The probability to dream in this state is very high, although we know we can dream also in other states of sleep. So these are cycles, so periodical during one single night. But if we look at the neuronal activity, this is even more dramatic, the change we can observe. Indeed, we know now that sleep is not a, let's say, kind of state with the inactivation of neurons. Neurons can be even more active than during wakefulness. What is different is the way they discharge is completely different with respect to wake. If you look at this graph here, you see that during wakefulness, neuron and the spike in activity is continuous. So it's a kind of continuous activity that you have during wakefulness. And when we enter into non-REM sleep, in particular, when we produce slow waves, there is a change in what's called fast mode oscillation. It's a kind of so-called bistable state, that is this slow oscillation that is characterized by an up state where neurons are extremely activated, and the down state where neurons are in a silence. So activation, inhibition. The slow oscillation was firstly well described by Mr. Asteriade, a neurophysiology from Romania that then moved to Canada. And now we know that this state of neurons, that is the state when neurons are during sleep and also when the brain is disconnected from the arms and so on, is probably the origin of the state of neurons. And during this slow oscillation, you can see, looking at EEG, that in the down state, also with scalp EEG, you can notice that there is a reduction in high frequency activity, while high frequency EEG activity is very evident during the up phase of this slow oscillation. And there are also many neurotransmitters that are modified. So there is a dramatic change in the activity of the neurons, and then when the brain enters into REM sleep, the state is very similar to the one of wakefulness. So we know that sleep is not homogeneous in the brain, so it's spatially non-uniform. So there are some regions of the brain that produce much more slow waves than others, so they sleep much deeper than others. And which are these regions of the brain? The frontal lobe is the region of the brain where we can notice the highest production of slow wave and slow wave activity. This is again the spectral profile calculated over the anterior derivation or the more posterior derivation. You can see that especially in the first cycle, non-REM cycle, there is a highest peak in the slow wave activity in the anterior region of the brain. And this again is something to do with plasticity. So we use a lot, probably, not everybody, the frontal lobe during the day, because the frontal lobe is a kind of maestro d'orchestra, so it's the one that controls everything around, and probably is the one also that we use more during the day. And it's also the one that needs to sleep more after, so where you produce more slow waves. And we know now that sleep can be also locally regulated, not only in terms of, say, the duration of wakefulness, but how much your brain is utilized during the day. This was, I think, one most important paper on this topic, using high density G and submitting the subject to an experiment that was an experiment characterized by a task that is, in this task you have to use a lot your parietal region. So in order to do this task, use your parietal region, so use a lot of this parietal region. And during the night after the task, what was seen in this study, that there was an increase, but there was a global increase in slow wave activity, but also with the local effect. So the region that the subject used a lot during the day was also the one that produced much more delta activity during the night. And there was also a correlation between the production of delta activity during the night and the performance to the same test the day after. So means that if you sleep after learning, if you sleep, your also efficacy, your system is much more efficient, also at the local level. So there is also a local regulation of sleep depending on what you do during the day. And this, again, what does it mean? The sleep has something to do with plasticity, with your activity that you perform during the day. You have probably long-term potentiation, then you produce, you increase the potentiation of neuron, and then during sleep probably there is this phenomenon of skull downscaling, and the fact that the sleep is also related to plasticity and there's also a local regulation is also expressed by the maturation of sleep during development. At the beginning, in children, slow activity is mostly concentrated in the posterior part of the brain, so the visual system, because it's the visual system, the part of your brain that developed earlier. And then there is a traveling of slow wave activity from the posterior region, the more we grew up, to the anterior ones during adolescence. So the distribution, topographic distribution of slow wave activity during sleep follow also the cognitive maturation. Then, again, this tells us that probably sleep has something to do with the plastic processes. Okay, now I will show you some data that we have recorded with intracerebral EEG. This is a technique that is used to investigate patients affected by drug-resistant epilepsy in order to detect the epileptogenic zone. Sometimes you are obliged to study the brain with electrodes that you put inside the brain of the subject. And with this technique, you can study everything inside the brain. All the region now can be reachable with all the computerized methods and robotic strategies that we can adopt. So for a neurophysiologist, this is fantastic. You can really arrive to a solution for the patient, but also you can study the activity of the brain. You can study the hippocampus, you can study the thalamus, the frontal lobe, and so on, all the region. And what we can see immediately when we look inside the brain, that every region, each region of the brain has its own EEG language. So they have a peculiar activity. So when we look at EEG on the scalp, it's a kind of average of all the activity with some topographic difference. But when we look inside, it's like to see many people with different language. And this is visible in wakefulness. I don't enter into detail to show which are these regions, but you can see that the activity is completely different. This is the thalamus, this is the hippocampus, this is more the central parietal region. And you notice in wake, also in non-REM sleep, here you see spindles also in the thalamus, but not in other region. And only during stage 3, when the brain is extremely synchronized in producing delta activity, it seems that all the brain is speaking the same language. And this is also strange. It's also, I think, very curious that this is also the state where there is the less amount of consciousness. When the brain is extremely synchronized, all the regions are producing the same activity, so there is only one language. It's probably the moment where your consciousness is at minimum level. And when we enter into REM sleep, again, quite similar to wakefulness, although if you look at the thalamus is still producing some slow waves, while here is this fast activity around 20-25 Hz. So EEG is very local. Inside the brain, you can see different features of EEG, depending on the region of you are looking at. And we know that using intracerebral electrodes, that spindle that have been considered really the thalamocortical oscillation, so global phenomenon. Again, spindles can be very locally regulated. It's very rare to have spindles that are all synchronized. You can have spindle in one region and asynchronous with another one. And this study again using a wavelet, or there are many methods that you can apply to detect spindles. And also slow oscillation. This is a study of Yuval Mir, again, when he was working with Giulio Tononi and Chiara Cirelli in medicine. And these are intracerebral electrodes, but also with, you see, some micro wires that can really also record the unit activity. So it's a method that allows you to analyze local field potential, EG, but also the single unit activity. And you can notice what we were saying before, up and down state of the slow oscillation and silence of neurons. But the global slow oscillation is very rare. It only occurs at the beginning of the night during very deep sleep. In the majority of cases, you can have a down state in one region, while the other that is very close is activated, and so on. So local waves are the most frequent condition, is the most frequent condition during sleep. So you can have local spindle, local slow waves. So now we can say, are really wakefulness linked to electrophysiological states that are mutually exclusive, or can be that there are conditions where sleep and wake coexist. And now we go back indeed to the dolphins, to the title. So we know dolphins, in order to swim, because they have to breathe, they are able to sleep with one hemisphere. So they keep this one eye open, and the contralateral hemisphere is the state of wakefulness, and this allows them to swim for a long time, but also sometimes to go up, breathe. So this is an extreme situation where an animal, in order to adapt to the condition, is able to sleep with one hemisphere, and the other one is in a state of sleep. And this is in dolphin, but we know that there are other animals. So the Cape Four seal also, this, you see also the position. So one eye is open, and you see the left and right hemisphere. They can sleep also together. If it's really quiet, they can stay and rest. Finally, can sleep with both hemispheres. But if it's a little bit dangerous, the condition, or he is obliged, it's obliged to swim. So he adopts this situation of alternating sleep from one to the other hemisphere. And also mallar. And here is very fascinating, the fact that here you see, this means left and right eye open, and you see the spectrum, left and right eye closed, or left eye closed and right eye open, and or vice versa. You can notice that especially the animals that stay on the edge of the group, they sleep with one hemisphere more deeply than the other. While the smallest one that can stay in the middle are probably protected. They can sleep with all the eyes that are closed and with the two hemispheres in the same way. So again, there is an adaptive role, and the very fascinating adaptive role is also in the frigate birds. So they fly for days and days. They are obliged to fly, and they also make a lot of changes in the direction. So in order to keep attention to the risk of predation but also not to, to avoid also collision when they move and they change. They can sleep with one hemisphere and the other one, so they can also look at especially the one that stay on the edge of the frigate. You see that these are the ones that can sleep with one eye open and also with this asymmetry in the production of slow waves. So there is clearly an adaptive. This is clearly an adaptive phenomenon, and that is necessary for the survival of the alien. But what's happened, and also this has been described, for example, also in the domestic chick. And again, this is clear when the chick is in the middle of the group. Chick can sleep with both hemispheres. The ones that are on the edges, they generally sleep more with an asymmetric distribution of slow wave from right and the left side. So what's happening in humans? So we don't have to adapt such a very extreme condition, but we have a situation, a clinical situation, when something similar appears. If you think about sleepwalker, what is a sleepwalker? The subject is walking around, sometimes also doing some very complex things, and then sometimes can be even frightening. And then in the morning, does not remember anything, and also if you wake up, him sometimes can tell you some dream activity, but can also tell you anything. So in this condition, as Carlos Schenk and Mark Mawol say, the brain is awake enough to perform complex motor verbal function, but also asleep enough not to have conscious awareness of what is going on. And I don't know if the video is working. Yes, show you this. This is a child. This is a typical confusion arousal. We are in deep sleep, so a lot of slow waves. Now the child is moving. You see muscle artifacts. It's kind of zombie moving, but with delta waves, up and down state probably. Are these up and down state and you're activating, activating? You see how many slow waves. And now he's even talking to this technician, although he's confused. Then the technician will ask, where are we? We are in Egypt. In Egypt, we are in Egypt, and you see still the persistence of slow waves. So going back to intracerebral recording, during the prosthetic evaluation of patients affected by epilepsy, we had the opportunity also to record some episodes of parasomnia in 3 subjects, and this was a subject with an electrode recording from the thalamus. Here, this is the electrodes recording from the thalamus, and these are other electrodes recording from the parietal region and cingulate gyrus and so on. So now the subject is sleeping. This is N3, slow wave sleep with slow oscillation. You see many regions producing slow oscillation, and the thalamus also produces slow oscillation, and these are spindles in the thalamus. And then here we have a confusion arousal. The patient moves, and you can notice that there is a desynchronization at the level of the thalamus, with the appearance of the typical wake-like activity around 20 Hz, although you see the persistence of some slow waves. And there is even an increase in the vector power of delta activity during the episodes of parasomnia. You see, this is thalamus with a shift towards higher frequency, and this is the parietal region with a shift towards delta activity. So kind of split brain. Thalamus is more activated in a kind of wake-like state, and the brain producing slow waves. Very similar to a study that you suspect is a metabolic investigation of the same episodes showing that there is some regions that are deactivated and others that are extremely activated. But are these slow waves really similar to the one of sleep? So they are really up and down state. They really modulate fast activity. So we made an analysis of this, and you can notice that the slow waves during the episodes of confusion and arousal are the same in terms of modulation of frequency activity of the others, the physiological one that we have during non-REM sleep. Very similar to what's happening during non-REM sleep. So the patient is, the subject is moving, is even probably also talking, but some part of the brain are in up and down state, while others are activated. And here another example with more electrodes recording from the motor cortex, the so-called limbic system, so including temporal pole, the insular cortex, the amygdala, then the frontal regions, and the hippocampus. Again, here you can see how local is the production, for example, of spindle. You see spindle and hippocampus, you see the 4-second critical periodicity. These are spindles that are not always together with the others. So there are really not represented in a global way, but very locally regulated. So here the subject is sleeping, and then he had an episode of sleep terror, so extremely frightened, moving in the bed. And what's happened to the brain? You notice, you can see here now is the EEG is compressed. These are 60 seconds. You can see the hippocampus here, spindles, and then at level of the frontal associative area, you have this increase in delta activity, delta slow waves, while you have a kind of activation of the limbic system, activation of the temporal pole, the insular cortex, the amygdala, and also an activation of the motor cortex. So the brain is really split in this case. Some part of the brain produce slow waves, they're probably up and down states, and the other are indeed activated. I think this can also explain some clinical feature, for example, of a parasomnia when you are extremely frightened, what we call sleep terror, because you have part of your brain, the limbic system, the motor system, that is probably more related to survival, that is strongly activated, but is not under the control of the frontal lobe. So you probably lose also kind of connectivity between the limbic and the frontal lobe. And so you have an overexpression of the limbic system, of the limbic activity, and you lack, say, the control of the frontal parietal region. So this is a dissociated clinical state. It is reflected also by a dissociation of the EEG activity, at least in terms of the activity that is produced during the episode. We still don't know very well with respect to the connectivity of this region. But there are also other electrophysiological dissociation that are not included in this, let's say, more not really physiological condition, because sleepwalking can happen to everyone, but it's not really the normal condition. For example, if we look at the sleep onset, when we fall asleep, and this is something that we have as an experience, now you are here, probably some of you are a little bit sleepy, so some start to be tired, and that could happen also that you are looking at me, listen to me, but then you don't remember anything what I have said. So what's happened to your brain when you are in this state? It has been shown that, for example, the thalamus, so at the beginning I was saying to you, Moruzzi discovered the reticulatory system, activation of the thalamus, then activation of the thalamus, activation of the cortex. Very, very simple. And so in this study, using a kind of spectral analysis, this is more a measure of the complexity of the signal. So when you go towards the production of slow waves, the signal is less complex when it's really activated with different frequencies. So you can notice that the thalamus reduce the complexity. So in other terms, start starts producing slow wave minutes before the appearance of slow waves in other region of the brain. So there is a delay that is not a delay of some seconds, or can be of minutes before the appearance of sleep, e.g. sleep activity on the cortex. The thalamus is sleeping. So you are there, you are moving, but your thalamus can be in a state of sleep. And couple of the year after, we also discovered that not only the thalamus, but also the hippocampus, that is probably the first region connected to the thalamus in the process to fall asleep. You see here, this is the state of wakefulness, where this is the typical activity of the thalamus, so this fast activity. This is the hippocampus, parietal cortex, and scalp PG. So this is, the subject is behavioral awake, and also from an electrophysiological point of view, is awake. Now here, if you look only to the scalp and parietal cortex, and you look at EOG and muscle tone, you say, okay, the subject is again awake from an electrophysiological point of view. The eyes are closed, but if you look at the thalamus, you see slow waves on the thalamus, and close to slow waves, you see also spindles in the hippocampus. So which kind of state is this one? Is awake? How we have to consider the state? Is awake because if you look at the scalp, it's awake, but if you look inside the brain, the hippocampus is sleeping. It's producing spindle. And if you think about the hippocampus, is also related to cognitive function, memory. If you are there and sleepy, listen to me, and your hippocampus is sleeping, you don't remember anything. And then after some minutes, you see that sleep appear everywhere. And if you look at the time course of the, this is the spectral power in the scalp. This is hippocampus and thalamus, spindle frequency activity. Here we have the sleep onset. You can notice that spindles in the hippocampus really increase minutes and minutes before, 20 minutes before, like the delta power in the thalamus. So there were subjects where spindle could appear even 25 minutes before the sleep onset on the cortex. So there is a huge variability, and probably this depends also on the sleep pressure, on how much you fight against your sleepiness and so on. And this, I think, can explain a lot of things. Can explain that when you are in a state of sleepiness and you fall asleep, your brain can have some, what we call archaeological hallucination. Your experience a little bit, say, psychedelic, and you can have even amnesia for the events that precede the sleep onset. And there is also probably the explanation of why sometimes there is a mismatch between subjective and objective sleep onset. This is very frequent, for example, in insomnia subject. They'll say, I was awake, and then we will see that I was sleeping. Contrary. And then when we enter into sleep, and then if you look at the evolution of delta power, this again, all these letters here represent different cortical region, and the more is yellow, the more in that region there is delta activity. You can see that at the beginning of sleep, there are regions that produce a lot of delta activity, and others that are still in kind of wake-like state, and only at the end of the cycle, you have such a, say, global production of delta activity everywhere. We can even, in this study, we measure this parameter that we call the spatial instability, and then also temporal instability, because there is another phenomenon, that the production of delta is not a continuous phenomenon, but you can notice in the brain some moments where there is a huge production of delta, then a kind of silence, and after 20 seconds another production. There is also a temporal instability, and if you look at the evolution of this, of the dynamic of spatial instability, so how homogeneous is the production of delta within the brain, and also the temporal stability, you can notice that there is a progressive decay in parallel with the progressive increase in the delta power. So the transition from wake to sleep is for sure a continuum. It's not, I would say, like a flip-flop mechanism, up, down, and this probably again is adaptive, otherwise can be extremely dangerous. Imagine when you are driving and you try to, okay, I want to resist, I will fight my sleepiness, and then at a moment arrives the sleep onset, because you're probably, many regions of your brain were sleeping, there were still a couple that were able to keep you awake, and then also two ones fall asleep, and then done, it's finished. So this continuous probably necessary, and this can also explain why probably when we are in deep sleep, that all our neurons are in up and down state, also the dialogue, the communication, I would say, the transfer of information within the system cannot really work so well, and this can have something to do also with our alteration of consciousness in the transition from wake to sleep. But not only a transition from wake to non-REM sleep, also the transition from no REM sleep and REM sleep is is a continuum. And again, it has been shown that, for example, neocortex and hippocampus could be in non-simultaneous state on average 1/3 of the night. So you can have a REM sleep in the hippocampus, no REM sleep in the parietal cortex for some minutes. And this again can explain some clinical phenomena. And these are a very interesting paper, and this is recently published again. The transition from one state to the other is extremely variable, depending on the intracerebral property of the different cortical region. And there are probably many methods that we could adopt in order to better understand what's happening, not only at the single channel, but also to investigate what's happening in the entire network during this transition. Because then I think we could explain many also clinical aspects. Okay, but we can have also during, we have seen that during sleepwalking, we have this kind of dissociation, but this dissociation is something that is physiologic. Many times during the night, we can have some part of our brain that are in a state of wakefulness for 20 seconds, 10 seconds, while other part of the brain that still produce delta waves. And in particular is the motor cortex, the promoter cortex, all probably the system that is necessary to be, let's say, really ready to go in case of dangers, that has probably a different threshold of arousal. And you can have many times during a single night the activation of the motor cortex and the production of delta waves on the frontal lobe or on the skull. And this sometimes can be also in a kind of oscillatory, as I was saying, this state of oscillatory state with the activation of the implementary motor region, motor cortex, parietal cortex, while increasing production of delta waves with this periodical way of occurrence. So this tells us that some parts of the brain can be electrophysiologically awake, while others can be asleep. So sleep and wakefulness are not mutually exclusive state. And indeed, the occurrence of local dissociated state is an intrinsic feature of physiological non-REM sleep, and probably a lower arousal threshold of the primary motor cortex could have an adaptive role. Indeed, if there is a danger in the middle of the night, I think it's necessary that your motor cortex is able to wake up immediately, although your frontal lobe is not really working so well. You have to simply run and escape from the condition. So this is not, we are not dolphin, just something similar to dolphin we can find also in our brain. And this, I think, is a very fun study demonstrating what's happening to someone. I don't know, for me, I can sleep everywhere, unless it's very cold. But there are people that say, when I go to sleep in a new house, first night, I cannot sleep. I stay in a kind of danger, you know. Indeed, if you think about sleep, sleep is a very dangerous condition for us, because for other animals especially, because then you lose your concentration, you don't know what's happening around. So when you arrive in a new room, the first night effect in humans has been shown in this paper that there is one hemisphere in particular, the left hemisphere, that has more arousal. So sometimes we wake up, and there's also a less production of slow waves, and also is the one that is more alert. So if you you make this protocol oddball paradigm, so evoke potential, so you see that the left hemisphere is ready to react to the stimulus much more than the right one. So there is an asymmetry of the two hemispheres. So you keep one eye open when you sleep in a new place. But more than this, I would say. So now we go towards the definition. We were saying, what is sleep? Sleep behavior, blah, blah, blah. Sleep is characterized by the modification of neurons from tonic firing to slow oscillation, up and down states. So which is the minimal amount of sleep, we can even say? Is how we can speak about sleep? Only behavior, or we have to look at the neural state and try to find the minimal amount of sleep. And this guy, Ivan Pigarev, from Moscow, many years ago, produced this study that was really a pioneer on that. He has been always let's say, a very intelligent and also making his own research, not really going towards fashion or. And this study was the first one that was able to show that after a prolonged wakefulness, so the subject is, in this case, the monkey is sleep deprived, after prolonged wakefulness, and after a long task, in this case was a visual task, at a certain moment, the monkeys start making some mistakes. And these mistakes were correlated to the appearance of down states over very limited region of the brain, the visual region, the visual cortex. So after a long period of wakefulness, after a long training that involved the occipital region, some mistakes occur when on the intracerebral recording, there was the appearance of down states. So the appearance of local islands, I would say, of sleep in the cortex of this subject was correlated to a cognitive deficit. And this has been demonstrated in Nature, this very elegant paper this is Vlad Wiazowski, again from the group of Giulio Tononi. A similar experiment showing that in rats, the appearance of local, after sleep deprivation, the appearance of local down states were correlated with the reduction in the performance of the animal. So, here we cannot really speak about sleep, but in terms of electrophysiology, what's appear in the brain is really the minimal amount of sleep. And if the minimal amount of sleep appear in your brain when you are doing something, in that moment your brain is not working so well. And this again has something probably to do with plasticity. When you are sleep deprived and use too much your brain, then your brain must fall asleep probably to recover and to be ready again. Can we, in humans, detect something similar? Can we really, we cannot put intracerebral electrode, although I will show you something did this. Can we really detect islands of sleep during wake? Looking at the SCAL-TG and going back to, I tell you the homeostatic process, we know that there is an increase in the process S, so in homeostatic accumulation during wake, that is also reflected by the progressive increase in theta activity, especially over the frontal region. So there is from the beginning of the day to the onset of sleep, so during the night, you have an increase in theta activity over the frontal region, and then you have a decay of slow wave activity. And the increase in theta activity during the day is also paralleled by the increase in production of slow wave activity. This was a study conducted by Jung and Simone Sarasso again in Madison, and was again an high-density G study, and the subjects were submitted to two very heavy tasks. One that was more related to the activation of the acoustic region, audiobook, and the other was more related to the more occipital region, driving simulator. So very, very continuous stats, many times per day. And you see that they were sleep deprived and performing the task or the audiobook task or the simulator task. And you see here that sleepiness progressively increased during the day, and also reaction time increased, the number of lapses, also the global increase in theta power, theta waves. But very interesting was that during the night there was an increase in the during the day there was a local increase in the theta power. This is the audiobook, so language task activated the left frontotemporal network. So you are performing the audiobook test, and you have a progressive increase in theta power, mostly in the region of your brain that you are using. And then also the night after, you produce more slow wave here. So this is very similar to the study I showed you at the beginning from Breton. Or if you use more the visual region, you have an increase in theta power during the day, and then you produce more delta activity in the recovery sleep. If theta waves are really something similar to the local islands of sleep, they could also alterate the network. And this again is another study, very similar one, again with the driving simulation, and then also with the executive function battery. So you have to use your frontal lobe. And the subjects were also submitted to fMRI recording. And in this study, they demonstrate something very similar to the study of Sarasso, so that there is a correlation with the increase in theta waves in the region of the brain that you use much more during the day, but also that the production of theta waves in one region of the brain has also a negative impact on all the network of that region was involved. And I think it's also interesting to say that if you produce more theta waves on the frontal lobe, then also your impulse control is a little bit altered, because you have some part of your frontal lobe that are in a state of sleep-like state. So if your frontal lobe is in a state of sleep, your capability also to control your emotion and your impulses is reduced. And even more, I'd say, is this message saying that when you have what we call mind blanking or mind wandering, it happens that you are doing something and then you say, what I have done, I don't remember. Or you are driving or doing something and you think many others. And again, this state of our cognition are related to the appearance of slow waves, local slow wave on the brain. And depending on where these local slow waves are produced, also you can have mind wandering, mind blanking, more anterior, more posterior. And you can really predict lapse of attention, we sleep like slow waves. So now imagine you are doing a task on driving simulator, and you realize that the subjects start to accelerate, start not to control the impulse. And probably this can be correlated to an increased production of slow wave on the frontal lobe. So also sleepiness is probably a local phenomenon. It's also related to what part of your brain are using a lot. So it's not this homeostatic process is also locally regulated depending on what you're doing, what your brain is doing. And if you're doing too much with one part of the brain, probably at a certain moment, this part of your brain will produce some slow waves. So you will not perform anymore very good, because the state entering a bistable state. So in this case, we cannot talk about a state of behavioral sleep, but again, at least the electrophysiological biomarker, say, sleep, the state of bistable state, the slow oscillation, can really alter your cognitive function, your performance, if it occurs during wakefulness. So with this, we can explain also many, with the fact that the boundaries between the different states are very fluid. We can explain many states of our brain, pathological one, physiological one, from parasomnia, hallucination. We don't know about psychiatric disease. So to conclude, probably, sleep and wakefulness are not mutually exclusive state. Probably local is more efficient than global. This can be something that has been evolutionarily selected. Could be that it implies that there are different firing patterns of different cortical regions, and also that the homeostatic process of the accumulation of your sleep pressure is not homogeneous. There are some regions that probably are more different threshold of sensitivity. And this electrophysiological dissociation may really help understanding different physiological and pathological features: drowsiness, amnesia, consciousness alteration, parasomnia, paradoxical insomnia, and so on. I thank you so much for your attention, and especially all these people that have been working with me for many, many years in Milan. Still, we collaborate, and now a new adventure in Genova here. I'm very happy to be in this town. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Lino. Very interesting talk. So, some questions?
Sleepy.
Okay, so I have a curiosity more. Since, okay, a lot of your study are on SAG data, no? So,
SAG.
SAG.
Yeah.
But so with the thalamus, the role of the spindle for thalamus, hippocampus, but also you think that also with the EEG we can study a bit these deeper regions?
It's very difficult to go so deep, but indeed now with all the techniques we have, source modeling and so on, you probably can infer many aspects. Probably we have to increase the number of electrodes on scalp.
How many electrodes do you use now?
Well, this depends on what you want to do. You can,
but you have also high density now. So.
You can, yes, high density, and we together, we perform a study showing that indeed you can do a good work in localizing also if you have 64 and not 256. So depending on what you want and depending what you are analyzing, I think.
Because probably if one can use a simultaneously stereo and the EEG scalp, one can see if you see something with EEG on the also thalamus spindle.
Yeah, but this is something that's very rare to be able to do that. I really hope in the future we could really discharge stereo EEG, because well, it's fantastic method to treat patients and to study epilepsy. But it's invasive, and I hope one day we will have other instruments. Only EEG or something. Yeah, EMG is fantastic, but you know, it's difficult to record very complex seizure inside the EMG.
Probably with the new generation of
method that you can move, we don't know. And then you need a lot of calculation and you know, but this, as I presented the data, is really classic. You know, I look at EEG, I look with my eyes, what I see with my eyes, because I'm a clinician. But indeed, probably we should try to, what we are not able to do is to see what's all the global feature modulated locally and vice versa, because I think it's very important to try to understand what's, for example, the physiologic part of the brain is doing in order to make a seizure start. Because, you know, when you have a pathological alteration in your brain, then also your physiological brain starts to have a kind of maladaptive behavior. And understanding how really the physiological part of the brain can modulate the pathological one can tell us a lot about the neuromodulation and so on. Because sometimes you cannot reach the pathological one, you cannot remove, but you could modulate the physiological one and try to modify the connection, what's happening. If you think about now going to epilepsy, a dysplasia, a lesion in the brain is there from the beginning of your life, but then only after 7 years start producing seizure. Before it was not able to speak with the other part of the brain. And so understanding more the network, more the transition, why this happened, and the critical state. This is what I'm very curious on that. The critical state.
This is a very powerful measure.
That's why I'm saying, because you really realize that there are some regions of the brain that are physiological region, the state in a subcritical state always. So probably they are very, they are really working a lot on producing a transition. And I think also for understanding transition in sleep, this method could be helpful.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Stop sharing.
Okay, yes. And I see if there is some stop recording. Yes, continue.
Yes, sir.